Okay, so this is putting math to work. My name is Chris Koss. My pronouns are they, them, and I teach at the Hub Center. And there's that intro on this slide here. So I wanted to start out by just talking about some of the things that I've done in adult career pathways. And I'll try to reference and make connections to some of these different courses throughout the presentation today, just because I know we have people teaching in a number of different career pathways here. So I taught a CDL class for a short little bit there. I designed curriculum and taught an intro to small business class at the Hub Center. And then I've also written curriculum for, but not actually taught the class for a CNA course, a childcare assistant course, and that was for Minneapolis adult education, and then a customer service course for them as well. And then there were a lot of customer service components in the intro to small business class. Some of what I'm hoping to cover today is being able to identify what kind of math tasks that employees in different career pathways need to use. I think sometimes when you're trying to get all of the workforce readiness and the literacy components into a course, math is easy to kind of put on the back burner or not even necessarily know where to start. So we're going to talk about how do we figure out what math these students need. And then how do we break down those tasks into the necessary steps so that students can accomplish it? You know, career and job place or workplace tasks usually have a lot of components in them, and we're already covering so much else. How do we figure out like what all students need in order to be able to do this? We also want to identify the math skills and standards that support accomplishing those tasks. And then make sure that the practice we're giving students is contextualized into that career pathway. I think we all know adult learners are really focused on their goals. And so making sure that that math practice doesn't feel like an add-on to the course, but it actually feels really immediate and important and relevant to the job that they're preparing for. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is figuring out like what math is it that we need to incorporate. And I want to approach that with this kind of question, like, what is it that you do in this job? As you saw in that list of different courses that I have either taught or written curriculum for, those are not things that I have ever worked in those industries. So it took some figuring out what we needed to cover. So we need to do some research. And I think, you know, as you have all written curriculum for adult career pathways and planned your lessons for, you know that it takes a lot of research to figure out what students need in a career pathway that you maybe haven't ever worked in. So one of the ways that I went about this was job shadowing. This is maybe the ideal way to figure this out. When I was preparing for the Intro to Small Business class that we have at the Hub Center, it was originally going to be a coffee cart. And so I went to a couple of other programs, coffee carts. Neighborhood House was running a coffee cart as sort of a social enterprise. And they had students who were English language learners who were preparing to work in that coffee cart. And then St. Paul Public Schools also had a transition program that was running a coffee cart. And just being in the space with the instructors and the students who were working in those, coffee cart kind of coffee shop environments gave me so much insight into all the tasks that they were doing and the kind of math that they were using that I wouldn't have had from just looking at a textbook or, even talking to someone about it. So that's what feels ideal about the job shadow, but that's not always possible for you to go into one of those spaces. So some other things that you can do is interviewing employees or employers in the different industries. So when I was preparing to do the curriculum for the child care assistant, Minneapolis Adult Ed has a relationship with Minneapolis Kids, which is kind of after school and before school programming. And because they had that employer relationship, I was actually able to interview the people who do the hiring and say, what kind of skills do you look for? What kind of stuff do you want your employees to be able to do so that I can incorporate that into the curriculum? It wasn't an adult career pathways class, but another class I taught at the Minneapolis St. Paul Airport was a workforce English. And as I got to know those students, I learned a lot about what they were doing in their everyday jobs that I was able to reincorporate into my lesson planning for that course as well. And so again, they know what they're doing and they know what they need in order to be able to do that. And so finding out from the people who actually do the job is another essential way we can kind of figure out what we need to incorporate. Workforce training competencies are another place that you can look. A lot of industries have training materials or even standards, just like we do, but for their employees. I did the IET cohort, I think last year, and it was just really interesting to see these long lists of standards that are already done for us. We just have to know where to look for them to figure out what their employees need to know. And with the CNA course that I wrote, there was a textbook. So that was another place that I could look to try to dig deeper into what math those employees were going to need. The last place I wanted to mention is job assessments. Some industries have tests that are part of the interview or application process. And so taking a look at those kinds of tests can also give you an idea of what kind of math your students will need to prepare for a particular job. Because I know there's folks from a number of different adult career pathways, some of these translate more easily to math tasks than other, right? We know nurses are doing a lot of math on the job. We know people in food service are doing a lot of measuring and taking temperatures of things. People in a retail environment or the intro to small business class, it's obvious more obvious what kind of math they need. But something I'm going to return to a few times today is that every employee needs math. And I think if for no other reason than being able to interpret their pay stub at the end of the week or the end of the month. I have talked with so many students who've experienced wage theft because they're not getting all of their hours reflected on their time card, or if they don't understand how to interpret that pay stub to begin with, they don't know whether they're experiencing wage theft or not. And so if you don't include math in any other aspect, make sure students are capable of looking at that pay stub and understanding, like, these are the hours I know I worked. This is what overtime looks like. This is how much I made, and then where some of this money is going for taxes and other things that are being taken out of that pay stub. So some of the math tasks that I incorporated into the courses that I've talked about so far. The small business course had, and that I'm going to kind of keep focusing on the small business course throughout today. Figuring out how much inventory costs, deciding prices and profit margins, also budgeting for your business, figuring out can you afford to hire another employee? Can you afford a different storefront, rental space, things like that. The customer service curriculum that I worked on, making change is a big area students need to be familiar with. And sometimes I hear people kind of push back on that, like the cash register, the computer figures it out for you. Students don't need to know how to do that. But something else that I'm going to return to a few times today is that what separates an employee who's going to be able to advance and make something a long-term career from somebody who just has a job for a little while is being able to kind of do some problem solving and say, oh, the cash register is not working right now. I still know how to make change. Or this register didn't come out at the end of the day, right? There's money missing, or oh, I thought I handed you a 5, I handed you a 10. Figuring out when a mistake has happened, an error has happened, and knowing how to fix it is still relevant, even with computers and calculators and things like that assisting us in our day-to-day work. And then again, pay stubs, checking your hours are correct, that your pay and benefits are correct. And I think there's maybe people who work with students in preparing to be interpreters. I was also thinking about, invoicing and being able to put together an invoice for the correct number of hours and things like that. So I've talked a lot already, and so I want to give you some time to talk together with other people who are here in a breakout room for just a few minutes and think about what kind of math tasks that your students need for their career pathway. And if you've been working with a class already, you probably have some ideas. And how did you figure out what math tasks that you needed to do with students, what they needed? And if you don't know, because you're still preparing to teach the class, where could you start looking to find out? It looks like Astrid put the breakout questions in the chat. So I think we're ready. It looks like there might still be several people in room 1. Oh, there we go. Everybody's coming back. Great. So I think we're a small enough group that hopefully a few people will feel comfortable turning their cameras on, or at least their microphone on, and sharing out. And I know a couple of you, so I'll just call on you if nobody volunteers. But I would love to hear some of what you talked about in your breakout rooms. What kind of math tasks employees need in your career pathway? And hopefully we have somebody from each of these different areas who can share. But we'll just, yeah, I would love to hear from each of you. There's a raise your hand button in Zoom. So does anybody want to raise their hand? And I have a really good wait time, so I'll just wait until somebody does.
Carlin has her hand up.
Oh, she does? I can't see it. Oh, because my chat box is in the way. Carlin, yeah.
Hello, Chris. Thank you
Hello.
for presenting today. So in our group, I just mentioned that for the class that I'm teaching, the para-educator, paraprofessional preparation class, students need to pass an exam. Part of the exam is math related. And So I'm very fortunate that I have a math partner, a math teacher partner who teaches that. But I also need to include that information in my evening class. Those students don't have access to the math class. And then what you said at the beginning about understanding your paycheck, I realized that we, as much as we talk about the different parts of the paraprofessional jobs in St. Paul, benefits, wages, hours, we're not talking about the paycheck. So I definitely want to add that to our course. So I just want to say thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you do talk about like joining the union and union contract stuff a little bit. And I feel like those dovetail really nicely together, being like, are those benefits that are in my contract on my pay stub, things like that. Great.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else willing to share what you talked about?
I can unmute and share. In our group, we were talking about, one of the presenters was talking about doing a healthcare class and blood pressure, temperature, and those are kind of the math problems they're working with in that group. And then we just talked about some of our classes that we're offering in manufacturing, about reading blueprints, measurements, and work orders.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. And is your name Jacqueline?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did you, so Carlin kind of talked about the tests they have to pass. How did you kind of figure out what those tasks were? Was it just from talking to employers or go ahead?
We're meeting with the employer and they're telling us the things they have to do on the job to understand their role. And that's how we're coming up with the math that they need then.
Great. Maybe let's do one more person and then we'll keep moving. Has anybody done a job shadow? Or maybe even interviewing some of the people who work in an environment to figure out what math tasks they need to do or need to know? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and keep moving along. I'll give a couple more opportunities for you to talk just briefly in your breakout rooms, but we've got lots more to cover. So once you know what kind of math tasks they're doing in their job, how do you figure out what math that is, and how you're going to build up to those skills, especially if you are not normally a math teacher? Something that we're going to talk about today is the CCRS math domains. So if you have a blue book, or Astrid put the link to the blue book into the chat. It includes in the math sections the math standards, and those are grouped both by level. So you've got your level A, B, C, D, E standards, but within those levels, they're grouped in domains. And these aren't all of them, but these are kind of the main ones. Numbers and operations and algebraic thinking, geometry, measurement and data, and statistics and probability. You can see those first two include a lot within them. So numbers and operations has base 10, which is kind of understanding, place value. It includes fractions, which I always hear from the math department is like a big area for a lot of adult learners. The number system, ratios and proportional relationships. The operations and algebraic thinking is expressions and equations, functions, inequalities, a lot of what students are doing if there's a formula that they need to use on a regular basis in their job. I heard Jacqueline talking about interpreting blueprints and taking measurements. So that's obviously going to fit into the geometry and some measurement and data. Statistics and probability, you might have some need for that in a lot of in workplaces. I'm thinking, you know, a small business owner might be looking at their sales over time, something like that. But a lot of these careers, the math is going to fit into these first two, the numbers and operations and the operations and algebraic thinking. And the examples that I'm going to talk about today also are kind of covered in those. So once we have our tasks picked out and identified, we've looked at our domains, we need to figure out where we're going to look within those domains for the standards that we're actually covering. So I have, again, those tasks that I talked about earlier, and I have the domains on the other side. And I just kind of went through and thought about, when I was planning for these, where am I going to look in the Blue Book for standards that address these tasks? Inventory costs. A lot of what you're trying to figure out is within addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, which is numbers and operations. Prices and profits, it's also going to be numbers and operations. It's really finding the difference between your the price that you're selling something for, the amount of money you get from the customer, and the cost that you have put out for that inventory. Making change, again, falls in numbers and operations. It's finding the difference. Checking your hours is a lot of multiplication as well. We might be getting into some algebraic thinking now, especially if we're trying to figure out percents of things that are being taken out. There's maybe some formulas that we can employ to check that. And so again, these are all kind of fitting in those first two domains. So here's an opportunity again for you to go into your breakout rooms and think with the other people in your group. It'll be the same people you talked to the first time. What domains that your math tasks fit into. And Astrid put those domains into the chat. So you can be thinking about, okay, my students need to read a blueprint. What's the math domain where I'm going to look for the CCRS standards that match with that task? And I think it'll be another 5 minutes with an additional minute of kind of warning for you to wrap up and be ready to come back.
Okay, I'll open the doors.
So I would love to hear from folks again. Where are you looking in the Blue Book? Or where do you think you're going to start looking? At which domain did you talk about? Are those math tasks kind of covered in? Or do you think they are probably covered in? And I moved my chat box, so hopefully this time I'll see when people raise their hands. Let me go back to this page here. So we have that list again handy. Did people feel like, for the most part, the tasks fit in those first couple, the numbers and operations, the operations and algebraic thinking? Or was the career pathway that you're teaching more in other domains?
Well, I can share from our group that most of our conversation
was kind of in the numbers and operations field. And I did share that in Owatonna, we met with one of our local manufacturers as we're doing kind of an language acquisition program right at the work site, and hoping to build that into a full career pathway and advancement, kind of more of a career advancement initiative. But the employer was very specific about what they wanted in terms of measurement, which was really helpful to us in putting together some of our work that will make it more effective. It's a glass manufacturer, so they have some real need for accuracy. And when you add language barriers to that, that's where they were finding a lot of waste and having to, reconfigure whole orders because someone read tape measure.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's really good to have that specificity from the employer, especially because we're looking at a whole blue book that has all these levels and all these standards, and it's like, where am I going to start? And so part of this process, both talking to the employer, but then also trying to identify the domains that we need to look within, helps us to narrow that down. I don't need to look at the whole blue book. This is not a math course. I'm just looking at the areas that apply to this career pathway. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. One final thing, we did also have one of our participants is working in the healthcare. We're very entry-level dietary aides. And so we did have a conversation about what's relevant math in that particular role. And, sometimes paycheck and benefits and hours is kind of where it's at because the tasks are the jobs are so task oriented and specific that they may not really require them to have a deep math background in order to perform well.
Right. Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm looking at our time and I want to make sure that we get to this next section here, breaking the task down. Something that I like to reference and think about whenever I'm building math practice into my class is the levels of knowing math. These are from Mahesh Sharma. If you did the M&I a million years ago, this is what we covered in there. But this helps me think about how I'm going to scaffold to a math task in any class, but I think particularly in a job place where you're going to need to be communicating with other employees and employers about the work that you did. So the first step is intuitive, and that is really an area where students are already comfortable, familiar with, or they can kind of logic it out. The task that I'm going to talk about as the example here is that figuring out the price of items in the coffee shop and then figuring out, how much I'm going to sell it for to know how much profit I need. For the intuitive level, you can kind of bring in an example like maybe a box of 10 chocolate bars or 10 donuts or something like that, that costs $10. Students can kind of figure that out without really needing to go deeply into like what math they're doing, right? One donut's $1. But then we can build on that problem solving as we move into these other levels. The concrete level is much more hands-on, and I have we didn't do this in class. I think ideally the concrete level you would actually do it. But we watched this video from Dan Meyer. It's a 3-act math task where he makes lemonade with a lemon wedge and a certain amount of sugar and a certain amount of water. And then he asks, what if I wanted to make this other size taste the same, but it's a larger amount? So the students have to scale up. And so we watched him do it. We watched how many lemon wedges were going in, how much sugar, how much water was going in. And the nice thing about this Dan Meyer lesson is that it also comes with all these questions for students to think about, to kind of, again, scaffold their thinking about how they're figuring that out. The pictorial level is really about drawing out or using pictures to do the math task as well and sort of demonstrate their thinking. So again, you could use maybe this lemonade task or the box of 10 donuts and have students show you how they're going to essentially group the money, the price of the items, with the number of items. And then at the abstract level, that's where we start applying this mathematically, and we bring in the symbols and the, equal signs, division, the equations, those abstract pieces of math. So for the cost of goods task that I was having students do, I used real items that we were planning to purchase for the coffee shop from the wholesale restaurant supply company. This is a box of 2,000 sugar packets that cost $11.65. So I had students think through, what would you do? How would you do this? So we can go back to the examples we've worked on at these previous levels and think about, oh, each of these sugar packets has a little bit of that money kind of divided out. Okay, we're doing a division problem. And here's how we would, set that up. This here is our final application piece. And this came from the small business curriculum that we had purchased for the class. But then I applied it to a bunch of the items specifically that we plan to buy for the coffee shop. So you can see under the cost of goods sold, a single cup of coffee includes a lid, a cup, those little cardboard sleeves. It's got coffee in it. It's got some sugar. It's got some creamer. Maybe you would need a stir stick. And then you also have to account for customer waste, the person who takes a pile of napkins or wants multiple sugar packets or things like that. But students worked on finding each of the unit prices for all of those components, and then added them up to get the total for that item. And then to figure out the profit, we discussed what price we thought was reasonable for a cup of coffee in a student coffee shop at the Hub Center, subtracted that cost to figure out what our profit was going to be. And you will be dismayed to know how much money they are making off of a $5 or $7 cup of coffee. The coffee's the cheapest part. Like the cup costs more. It's really kind of outrageous. And we got to talk about that. And the students in the class actually were like, oh, we can make this coffee pretty inexpensive actually for our classmates, and still make a good profit because these items are so cheap. And then finally, you want to get to the communication level. This is where they're actually using this information in the workplace. As a small business owner, you want to be able to explain why, if you're talking to your accountant, you priced your items at the level that you did and how much the item's actually costing you, so that you can be thinking about your profit margins and planning for other parts of your business. Here, I was really working backwards from the task, right? What do I need to be able to do? I need to set a price for this cup of coffee. But I had to think about what were all the pieces going into that, and where did I need to start in order to get students to the point where they could do this? And I think that's maybe the trickiest part, right? That's the crux, is like we have multi-level learners to begin with in an adult career pathways class. And now we're just looking at their math skills. They might be all over the map. If we go back to this sugar packets task, this might be a task that I would give to a student who's just kind of beginning with the understanding how to do this division problem. There were other items that actually were sold by the case, and the case had multiple boxes or packages inside, and that box or package had multiple items inside. And so I did give more complex versions of those problems to other students who already had that math foundation and I knew could kind of go to the next level with it. The other thing that we want to be thinking about in designing these math tasks is coherence. And this is one of the other things that the math CCRS focuses on. They have coherence, focus, and rigor. Coherence, to me, is like really helpful when you are in that multi-level environment. Both because we want to be making sure that we're building within a course, but also because we want to be backing up for students who are at a lower level, and then adding complexity for students who are at a higher level and come in with more math skills. So once you've narrowed down the standard that the task addresses, right? We looked within the domain to kind of figure out which standard we're addressing. Now we can go back a level or forward a level to try to look at standards that help us meet it or push us beyond it. And I have this like little person at the sewing machine because I always think of coherence as the thread that kind of ties us together from one level to another. I also think that when you're working on these tasks in class, we can be intentional about how students share the work that they have done. I really tried to take advantage of the different levels of math knowledge and proficiency that the students had to do the scaffolding for me. So students who were, maybe using repeated addition, having them explain how they solved the problem first, and then following up with a student who knows how to use multiplication to take a shortcut from that repeated addition, and continuing to have students share their work and their approach to problem solving in a scaffolded way so that everybody gets kind of that push, that little nudge up a level by seeing somebody else work. But then also we can see, where did this thinking start from? What's the foundation here? There's another task called My Favorite No, which does this same thing, but uses students' wrong answers to highlight maybe a misconception or a place where multiple students are making a mistake. You don't share the student's name, but you share their work and kind of highlight that, again, to do that scaffolding. So here are, here's an example of what I'm talking about. I know there's a lot of text on the screen, but this one in the middle here is kind of the standard that I felt most addressed this cost of goods and profit margin task. Understanding the concept of a unit rate, A divided by B, associated with a ratio, A to B, where B is not 0. And I loved it because the CCRS actually has this example in the book. We paid $75 for 15 hamburgers, which is a rate of $5 per hamburger. Great, yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do here when we're figuring out our cost of goods. And that is in level C, that standard, and it's 6 RP.2. That 6 means it's like grade 6, a grade 6 standard, and the RP is for ratios and proportions. So what I did then is I looked back at level B and up to level D to see what other standards I could use to kind of build that coherence. D was a little easier because there's a 7-point RP. Using proportional relationships to solve multi-step ratio and percent problems. Now we can talk about simple interest, tax, markup and markdowns, gratuities, commissions, things like that. So, you know, once I've figured out I want to make this much profit, so this is what my price needs to be. What if I want to have a sale? You know, what a percent off sale? What's that going to do to my profits? There was not an 5-point RP standard in the CCRS book. But in the level B standards, I did find interpret whole number quotients of whole numbers. For example, interpret 56 divided by 8 as the number of objects in each share when 56 objects are partitioned equally into 8 shares. So that's the foundational division problem that we were doing to find that unit rate in the level C standard. So we do need to be able to do that before what we're doing in the level C standard is going to make sense. Okay. Oh, we're actually doing really good on time. Okay. I was thinking I need to wrap up in 5 minutes, but actually I've got more than that. So a couple things that I want to talk about before we're done, and then we should have some time for kind of questions, discussion, is again, going back to what we talked about earlier in the job shadowing or talking to employers and employees, is making sure that you are using realia and tools, forms, invoices, things like that, that the students are using, so that once you've built up that math task, it has that connection to the workplace. This particular task, the cost of goods sold, this form was just from the curriculum. It's not, you know, realia. You're probably going to have a different kind of invoice or form, but using the actual products, build that buy-in. Oh, we're making a coffee shop. We're actually practicing with the items that we're going to be selling in the coffee shop. A couple people have kind of talked about this already. You know, there are some tasks that are pretty straightforward. There might be a formula or a shortcut that employees take on a regular basis. We have to be able to do that because otherwise it takes too long on the workplace, right? We don't have time for that. But we want to make sure that we're designing these tasks and putting practice into the class itself so that students understand what they're doing when they're applying that formula, and they know when an error or a mistake has been made. I used that example earlier of making change. You know, maybe the cash register is down right now and I need to be able to do that. But also maybe it's just not making sense and I can identify that something went wrong here. Oh, I gave you the wrong bill. That's what the problem is. Oh, whose example was that earlier? Your camera's off, so now I don't remember who it was, but you were talking about the inaccuracies and the sort of waste of in the glass manufacturing, right? Where if somebody makes the wrong measurement, a whole order might go to waste. And so being able to catch those mistakes ahead of time, even if it's a fairly routine sort of, you know, what seems like a straightforward measurement task, making sure that students know, oh, this doesn't make sense. These calculations aren't adding up. I need to check my work or figure out what went wrong here. And then please assume that students do need math on the job. maybe I've already overstated my case, but I think even if there's not a lot of complex math in the job itself, understanding your wages and your benefits is really important math for all employees to be able to do. And of course, bringing that sort of problem solving mentality to your work is also a huge, a really important thing for employees to be able to do. Okay. Like I said, I thought I was ending at 11:15, so we do have a little bit of time left. And so I would like to just kind of open things up for some discussion and questions, because my examples were so specific towards the end about the particular task of cost of goods sold, understanding unit rate, to be able to set a price. I'd love to hear what people are thinking about for your particular industries and see if we can kind of brainstorm together what kind of standards you're going to be looking for and how you can kind of scaffold to those tasks. I also have my email address here because I know sometimes we're in a space like this, a workshop, where you're like, oh, this is great, I'm going to apply this later. And then later, when you go to apply it, you have a bunch of questions that you didn't think of in the session. So I am more than happy to answer questions about work that you're doing, or some of these curriculum that I have written, if you are also working on a similar type of thing.
Chris,
Yeah,
I just wanted to ask you a resource question. I know we've talked about the Blue Book a lot, but I regularly get questions from students about what are some great video resources for fractions. And I found some on Khan Academy. Do you have any other suggestions?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. I will keep thinking about it. The things that come to mind off the top of my head, I do think Khan Academy is great. And a lot of students really like that formula of being able to watch a video and then there's a bunch of practice and then it'll send me to another video if I need more. The other thing that I really like, and I don't know if everybody realizes this, if they haven't done a lot of like math professional development with Atlas, is the CCRS standards are based off Common Core standards. And so if you take that, you're nodding your head, so maybe you do already know this. If you take one of these, like the 6.rp.2 and just Google it, you will find tons of resources that K-12 teachers have made that you can incorporate. And so, you know, always use your best judgment. And here I'm really advocating for using things that are contextualized to the job that they're doing. But, you know, if you're in that scaffolding space at the concrete and pictorial level, trying to work towards the application piece, this is a great place to find a lot of practice for students to do, and fairly easily. There's just tons of stuff when you Google those.
I thank you. I did forget about that. So yeah, I will do that.
Other thoughts or questions that people have while we're kind of running up to our last few minutes together? Or other resources for Carlin. I'm sure as other people are incorporating math into their career pathways courses, you've probably also found some good places to look.
I will unmute and talk. I know when we're talking about math, I find it very helpful to use like Teachers Pay Teachers or any other site you use, but find an anchor chart or a poster they're called. So it gives you the directions on that math, like the steps. So that's a visual for students that need that, like whether it be equations, fractions. It's just, they can have the visual and go through the steps to understand it better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those types of things are really nice to have in the classroom. And then it's something that as students return to it, it becomes routine and familiar because, you know, when you're doing it on the job, you got to be, you know, ready to go. And so having that sort of, if it's a mnemonic device or something you can picture, something you can go back and reference to make sure you're doing all the pieces in order. Yeah, that's great. Well, I am more than happy to stick around for a little longer if people have thoughts or questions and things like that. I did wrap up a little earlier than I intended to. But so if other folks want to kind of take advantage of wrapping up early, you can certainly do that. But I will stick around. So if people have things they would like to talk about, we can do that.